Our Sunday lectionary has been calling on us to read from that 10th chapter of Mark's Gospel for about the last 4 weeks. And it's a good thing to take a small snippet of Scripture to chew on as we do week by week. But it also can be very helpful to stand back a bit and get the larger picture, especially taking a chance to look at how this fits into the whole gospel. That gospel story began by saying that Jesus and his disciples entered Jericho. Now, that you may have just passed by that and not even really heard it, or just thought, okay, it's just setting the stage. But we could also stop and take a look and ask ourselves, well, why were they entering Jericho? Why were they traveling at all? What was the context of their being there? Well, in Mark's Gospel, Jesus and the disciples are on a journey from the moment he calls them to the moment that he dies. Remember, he called them by the Sea of Galilee, and I brought somebody said this took them right back to church school as a child. I know it's hard to see from the back, but well, it's even harder to see from the wide. But at least it can give you a little sense of direction here. This little blue dot here is the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus called the disciples. And then he goes with them to Capernaum, the town of Capernaum, and all through this green region of Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God. And then they head all the way up to the north coast, to Tyre and Sidon. And when they're done there, they come all the way back to the Sea of Galilee, but they go to the other side, down south on the east, to the land of the Decapolis. Then they head straight north, all the way up to Caesarea Philippi. They come back down, they go into Galilee, they stop back at Capernaum, sort of a home base, and then they head down south into this yellow region of Judea. Jerusalem is right here, and Jericho is just a stone's throw from Jerusalem. But still, you know, what's the purpose of all this travel? Where are they going? Is there an end in sight, or are they just like a rock band on tour that goes wherever the gigs are? Well, here's my Bible. In the passages leading up to what we heard read this morning, Jesus fills us in on what's going on and where this travel is headed. He takes the 12 apart by themselves, and he tells them, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit upon him and scourge him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise." Well, that's quite a bit of news to get from your teacher on a road trip, don't you think? And what I find even more amazing is the response from the disciples, or at least two of the leaders, James and John. You know, they were brothers. They were part of Jesus' intimate 3 companions. They come up to Jesus right after he said this. It's pretty heavy-duty stuff. And they say, "Teacher, we'd like to ask you to do for us whatever we have in mind." And Jesus looks at them and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" Now, because we just heard the gospel, it should ring a bell. It's exactly the same words that he asked Bartimaeus afterwards. "What do you want me to do for you?" And it's amazing what they asked for. Does anybody here remember what they asked for? Carol? Bingo. Bingo. Jesus has just told them that he is going to undergo unimaginable suffering, scourging. It was hard to even conceive of these metal rods that were on the end of whipcords that went into your flesh. He's going to die an agonizing death. And they're just thinking about lining up for seats of glory. Unbelievable. And Jesus looks at him and he says, you know, you don't understand at all what you're asking. He says to them, yes, you can be baptized into my life. And yes, you can even drink from the same cup of suffering that I'm about to partake. But to sit on my right and my left hand, that is a question of power, and you are clueless. And of course, the other disciples are indignant that these two have enough chutzpah to jockey for that position. Actually, one of the gospel writers is so embarrassed by the incident, he says that their mother asked. True. And Jesus, of course, uses it as a teachable moment. And he says, you know, the Gentiles who are in power lord it over their subjects, but not so among us. He said, whoever wants to be a leader must be a servant. And whoever would be first of all must be last. So then we come to Jericho. It's all in this 10th chapter. And old blind Bartimaeus yelling out, Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus says the same words. What do you want me to do for you? And he says, I want to receive my sight. And Jesus doesn't hesitate. He says, go. Your faith has made you well. And we're told that he received his sight immediately. Now, I'm not so sure that old Bartimaeus knew what he was asking for either. We're told that he followed Jesus on the way, but what about after that? I mean, was visual sight all that he had expected it to be? Or possibly more? Did his newfound vision lead him to a martyr's death, as so many of Jesus' followers met? Again, Bartimaeus may not have understood what he was asking for any more than James and John, but he was ready. He was ready to risk. He couldn't shut him up. He was ready to receive wholeness, and he was ready to follow Jesus on the way. Now, don't you wonder what James and John must have been thinking during this little interchange? I mean, they had just come from being on the road asking Jesus for a favor and having him chastise them in front of all their buddies. And here, they see this blind street person get everything that he asked for. We're told that many rebuked Bartimaeus when he was crying out for Jesus, and it's quite conceivable that James and John were among them, because they were certainly part of the disciples who rebuked the people bringing children to Jesus for him to bless. So here they get slapped on the wrist again. And it's very ironic here we're presented with two of the most esteemed disciples having been rebuked by the Lord, and a rebuked street person being esteemed by the Lord. Perhaps this is a classic example of the first shall be last and the last first. So this ends the 10th chapter of Mark's Gospel. In chapter 11, we have Jesus immediately going back into Jerusalem to meet his suffering and his death. Now, throughout Jesus' ministry, people were continually coming to him as a politically triumphant Messiah. That was the idea of Messiah, to free Israel from Roman rule. And Jesus always, when presented with this image of him, responded putting his messiahship in the context of God's suffering servant. And the Gospels attest to the fact that the disciples, time and time again, just failed to see, failed to understand what Jesus was all about. And you know, I wonder how often we do the same. How often do we approach Christ as some galactic gift giver who we can pull aside and say, I want you to do whatever I ask of you. I do it. And you know, no matter what our frame of mind is when we approach Jesus, he still asks us the same question. that he asked James and John and a poor old Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" What do you want Christ to do for you? Do you know? And if you know, do you really know what you're asking? And if so, are you ready to receive it? You know, when I think about this, I think, how do I know these questions? And I can keep asking those kind of questions until I'm just afraid to ask God anything. And even at times like that, I have to realize that it's not the blessed apostles, but it's a blind beggar living on the street who gives me hope. Because I may not understand what Jesus' Messiahship was about, even after 3 years of seminary, 25 years of parish ministry. I may be clueless. And I may not understand what it is I'm really asking in my prayers. But I know that my heart leaps for joy when I hear the sound of the Lord passing by. And I cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." What do I want? To receive my sight, so that I too may follow Jesus on the way, even the way of the cross.